Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the Flicks the Church Forgot. My name is Peter Laws, and this is the little dead animal that's stuck on the end of my microphone. Today, I would like to talk to you about, well, firstly about a book which has inspired the episode today, which is this, called Paperbacks from Hell. This is written by Grady Hendrix, who is an author who's written My Best Friend's Exorcism and Horror Store, which is the horror novel set in a kind of department IKEA type store, and he's written this amazing book with in collaboration with Will Erickson called Paperbacks from Hell, and it explores the twisted history of 70s and 80s horror fiction. And this is a subject very close to my heart because I used to really enjoy reading some of these kind of scary books when I was growing up, and still read these sorts of books today. This is an excellent book which has some amazing covers in it, and it's really well written, so I really would recommend you get this. It's laugh out loud funny, but it's also really a fascinating sort of romp through the history of these old books. But I thought, inspired by this, I thought I'd share with you some of the paperbacks from hell that I have enjoyed over the years, things that I've read recently and also things that I read even when I was a little kid. So join me as I explore my own set of paperbacks from hell. Okay, so here are some of the paperbacks that I've got here. Obviously, I've got a lot more books than this, but I decided to choose these ones because these are the types of books and covers that you may well see in Grady Hendrix's Paperbacks from Hell, those types of books. So I thought I'd look at those ones specifically all along here. Obviously, not that one. That's my book in all good bookshops now. Always on it. Right, so let's start off with this one. Friday the 13th, Part 3, 3D. This is obviously the novelization of the third in the Friday the 13th franchise. I'm not fully aware of the rareness of this book, if this is particularly rare or not, but what I do know is there are two versions of two novelizations of Friday the 13th Part 3, and this is the one, I think this is the cool one, because this has an alternative ending. It's a different ending to what happens in the film. I'm not going to tell you what happens at the ending of this. I guess you could Google it if you really wanted to. I would recommend picking up the book and trying to read it yourself if you can find it. But the ending is really, it was like, what? I was not expecting that. And I really enjoyed how they did that. It's a cool little paperback, and it's got, I love this. When film tie-ins used to have these pictures from the movies, and here they are in kind of grainy, sleazy black and white. But it's great. So it's quite fun reading. I've read the original Friday the 13th novel as well, the novelization, and it is kind of fun to hear the backstories of all of these people who essentially in slasher movies, there sometimes is, but it's not really about the backstories of the characters. It's about the slashing. But in these, they eke the books out a bit more with more information. So if you want a little bit more depth to your slasher experience, try out some novelizations of classic ones like this. Friday the 13th, Part 3, 3D. What have we got next? This is another. No, actually, there's a few novelizations of films in here, but not all. So this is Pin. What a great film Pin is, which I've actually reviewed on this show on an audio episode ages ago. But Pin is an excellent film, and this is the novelization. Oh, sorry, it's not the novelization. This is the novel that inspired the other film. It tells a story of a brother and sister whose dad basically teaches them the ways of the world through an anatomical dummy. Their dad's a doctor, and so he teaches them how to deal with the world through this anatomical dummy by throwing his voice and making the dummy speak to them and tell them how the world is. It's a pretty messed up and strange way of doing it, the way he's like he's throwing his voice to do this, a ventriloquist. But gradually, as you can imagine, the son, at least Leon, he starts to believe that Pin is a real friend, and starts to get a bit psychotic as he's doing it, as you can imagine. So it's a really cool book. It's very weird and twisted, which I enjoyed, but also it's just a really fascinating novel. It reminds me a little bit of Psycho, the idea of like a crazy person, or a mentally imbalanced person, I should say, kind of getting influence from a dead inanimate object. Norman Bates with his dead mother, and here Leon with his anatomical dummy. But yeah, check it out, and do check out the film. It's a really excellent, thought-provoking thriller, which not everybody seems to have seen. I don't know why, but it's great. Another novelization here of a film, and this is The Incredible Melting Man. He is a human time bomb. Look at him. He's not looking very well at all on there. This is obviously the film. You may well have seen it from Rick Baker did the effects of it, and some pretty gruesome and gooey, I should say, effects they are. But no, it's good, and this novelization is a lot of fun. The story, if you're not aware, is basically 3 astronauts go up to see to check out Mars, and when they're traveling back into their capsule comes a little bit of flubber, like a kind of weird slime which has a sentient personality and wants to kind of take over the Earth. And so when they get back, one of the astronauts, called Steve, he is possessed by this slime, and he starts to maraud through the countryside of America, basically just killing people. And in the book, there's lots of kind of angst. Why am I doing this? Steve has become this walking... well, it says he is a human time bomb. I always thought it was weird the way the writing of the subtitle is just exactly the same size as the title itself, which is a bit odd. So it looks like this book's called The Incredible Melting Man, He is a Human Time Bomb, which is a bit of a mouthful. But no, it's really worth... I enjoyed reading this, and I really enjoyed the film too. There's loads of kind of science fiction-y space scenes in this as well, if you like that sort of stuff. But on the whole, I really kind of like the stuff on Earth, particularly, and poor old Steve trying to come to terms with the monster he's becoming, while the government is trying to send more people up to Mars, and not realizing the horrors of slime that await. So yeah, The Incredible Melting Man, lots of fun. Now, this is cool. Right, I'm going to have to pick 4 books up at the same time here, because we have here the Amityville Horror collection. Now, I need to kind of explain these a little bit, because I find this is quite interesting. It is to me, at least. This is the original Amityville Horror book, the novel by Jay Anson. I say novel, but of course you find it in the non-fiction section, because it was said to be a scary and fascinating true life account of what happened to George and Kathy Lutz in 1975 when they fled their house on 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville. It says 112 on the back here, but part of me's wondering if it's 108. Anyway, I guess it's 112. I'll check into that. Anyway, this book obviously was a sensation, and I read it early on, and I thought it was really scary when I read it as a teenager. And watching the film as well, I found particularly scary. I still find that film to be pretty unsettling. But of course, there's loads of controversy around the Amityville case, whether or not it was real or not. Most people seem to think that there wasn't much to it, and that it was a fake. Obviously, the murders that happened in the house were not fake at all. They really did happen. Ronald DeFeo killing his whole family. But the hauntings that followed are obviously up for controversial debate. What I found interesting about this was that I'd read this ages ago and really enjoyed it. But then I remember as a teenager, I saw this on the shelf, the Amityville Horror Part 2, and for some reason I didn't bother reading this. I think I was so into Stephen King at the time, I had him on my shelf, and I think the reason was I assumed this was a novelization of the Amityville Part 2, The Possession, the cinema release, which is an excellent film, by the way, and I really loved that film. But I thought, I guess I already know the story, and it's a made-up story, so maybe I'll just skip it and I'll read something else instead. And then it disappeared from the shelf, and I never saw it again. I only recently discovered that there was apparently a continued haunting of the Lutzes, and these further books basically chart that. So in this, you've got George and Kathy Lutz, this is part 2, they leave Ocean Avenue and they sort of head off to try and escape the horror, but of course the horror follows them home to their new home in California, and they're hanging out with Father Mancuso, the priest who's also getting freaked out by this horror that is continuing to chase him too, and it's a bit over the top, and in fact all of these books, when you read the sequels, they do nothing for the credibility of the original Amityville Horror. They just start making you think, yeah, I think maybe that most of this was made up, particularly the sequels. But there's a part of me though that still remembers those first chills that I got with Amityville, and I'm not prepared to say therefore all of the Amityville Horror experiences were fake, that George and Kathy Lutz just sat there and kind of made it up in their basement, they were just sat with an author or something over a bottle of wine and came up with this idea. It's possible, but I rather suspect that even if that happened, it may have been based on real occurrences that gave them that idea. When you look into paranormal cases, it does happen sometimes where, like in Enfield, the poltergeist there, real things seem to have been happening, or inexplicable things at least. But then in time, the girls who were at the center of that did fake a few of those things because they thought, keep getting attention and things like that. Some of the early spiritualists did that too. Heck, some of the current spiritualists still do that too. But what I mean is, when you see fakery at work, it doesn't automatically assume, therefore, that there was never something to start with in the first place. But anyway, I digress. So the Amityville Horror Part 2, it's, at first, when I read this, I was like, reading through it thinking, this is annoying me because it is just so over the top and silly. And why haven't I heard more about this and only about the original Amityville Horror? Thinking, this is basically just made up. But once you start reading it, you get into it. It's actually quite fun. And then here, the Amityville Horror Part 3, the final chapter. They've gone to California and then they've gone to Europe to try and escape the horror, but it keeps on following them and chasing them on planes and all these sorts of things. In Australia, across the Atlantic. Even in a plane, the monster, the demonic things are trying to chase them. So it continues. Oh, by the way, interestingly, with the Amityville Horror, do you know the little girl, Amy, she called, the daughter, who says that she's got a friend, an imaginary friend. She says it's imaginary, called Jody. Jody the pig monster thing. I always thought Jody was a girl. Jody doesn't like George, from the film. Anyway, it turns out in Amityville Horror Part 2, Jody's a boy. That was a slight revelation to me. I don't know how I missed that, but all these years I've thought Jody was a girl, but she wasn't. And then it goes on to this. This is the kind of final one in this series by the author John G. Jones, although Jay Anson wrote the original. This is Amityville Horror, The Untold Stories. And again, it's supposedly more non-fiction. Here we get a guy called Arnie, who's a lovely, sort of good-natured bloke who gets given George Lutz's power tools. And then shortly after, these power tools have got possessed demons in them, and they spring onto him, and they end up making him sort of smash through walls and try and kill his family. The Shining style. And Anne Cunningham, a psychic who breaks into the house and tries to sort of disprove that there is demonic forces there. But of course, she realizes very soon that it's not a hoax at all, and she comes shrieking out of the house and then seemingly disappears without a trace. The Amityville Horror, The Untold Stories. All these books, I actually, because I enjoyed the Amityville Horror so much as growing up and still find it an intriguing case, I actually quite enjoyed reading these. But like Grady Hendrix, for example, he slates them in his book because he has an actual good point, because he makes the point that basically Amityville was a massive hoax, and because there were children involved, and children being carted all over the world, apparently, promoting this, that he basically says that this is little more than child abuse, which is a sort of strong statement when I read it at first, but then I slowed down and thought, maybe that if it was a lie, and them just going around and trying getting the kids to manufacture this lie. But what's interesting is, I don't know if you've seen the Amityville documentary called My Amityville Horror, which features, is it Daniel Lutz, I think he's called? But anyway, one of the kids who's grown up now, and he talks about his experiences in Amityville growing up, and he seems to claim that some things did happen. But what he does also claim is that George Lutz was not the nicest guy in the world. It's an understatement. And what's ironic is when you read these non-fiction accounts, George Lutz comes across as a bit of a hero, that he's this guy who comes into Kathy Lutz's family and sort of looks after the kids because they're not his kids, and he marries her, and he's this lovely, strong, heroic type who's protecting his family. But from the sounds of it, it wasn't quite as idyllic and heroic as that. What we got next? I tell you what, I think I'm just looking at the time there. We've got 16 minutes on the clock. Amityville distracted me a little bit. Hope you don't mind. So we're going to draw it to a close there, and then join me in the next episode where we will continue our little jaunt through these books. We've got werewolves, monsters, and all sorts of crazy stuff coming. So tune in to the next episode. But until then, don't forget the Flicks the Church Forgot. Follow me on Twitter at Rev Peter Laws, or check out the Facebook page, Peter Laws Author, or the website, of course, peterlaws.co.uk. Bye.